Okay, well, as Paul said, being the last one, I ended up thinking, well, we're mostly on the same page here, and so there's quite a lot of stuff that I was going to say that I don't need to say, which on one sense is a good thing, because it means you don't have to listen to me too long. But it also means that what I do want to concentrate on is some of the things where I think maybe we're not all on the same page in relation to this issue. We were asked to do the 3 challenges. I mean, my 3 challenges were the government, the private sector, and the voluntary sector. Now, as far as the government is concerned, if we're dealing with the cuts agenda, I think we're absolutely on the same page. But my issue with the government is not this government, although this government presents a particularly odious face. My problem is with government in general in the 21st century. The programme of strategy of the current government at the moment was many of the elements of this were begun under New Labour. They're simply continuing something that was begun the previous administration, and if Miliband and his colleagues are to believe, then a future Labour government would continue very much of the catastrophic policies that we're currently experiencing. So my wider point here, the twin themes of this conference are cuts and outsourcing, but my wider point here is that the times we live in are bad and are getting worse, but it's not just about the cuts and the recession. The problem we have is that the whole of our political establishment is now almost entirely focused on global business interests. It's increasingly divorced from the people, and it's busy rewriting the settlement between them and us. When I was a young man working at Background Settlement, my mentor was an activist called Jim Radford, and I was a squatters leader. And I remember him saying to me, he said, "Andy, as far as Westminster is concerned, never forget that they're closer to each other than they are to us." And it still resonates with me. So, what my problem with what's happening and has happened in the political establishment is that, others have referred to it, is there's the marketisation and financialisation of practically everything, the progressive reduction and elimination of our civil liberties, the disinvestment in public services, and in a suspicious and punitive mood music which says that dissent is simply unacceptable. You're either with us or against us. Which is why one of our little roundels on our logo says dissent protects democracy. We major on dissent. It's very important. So that's the backcloth to this. I'm not going to talk much about the cuts because I really do think we're on the same page here. But I just want to refer people who haven't seen it to an excellent presentation prepared by the Campaign for a Fair Society, who are represented here today, which actually very clearly sets out the disproportionate focus and profile of the cuts. And the headline here is that 25% of the cuts are focused on 2% of the population, and it's not the right 2%. And at the other end of the spectrum, the staggering figure that an increase in Treasury, Cabinet and Quango expenditure predicted between now and 2015 is, wait for it, 254.5%. This government is centralising power, not decentralising it, and the Trojan horse of empowering local people and localism and such like, should be seen for the fiction that it is. The only other thing I want to say about the cuts, though, is that, and other people have referred to it, is that the treatment of disabled people within this programme is an absolute disgrace. And the disability movement is a kind of shining light in the firmament of resistance as far as we're concerned in all of this. And in one's tiny tribute to this, we've included in your pack a copy of a flyer for Pat's petition, which is one action that the disability groups are currently involved with. So, please respect that, sign up and get your friends and colleagues to do so as well. As far as outsourcing is concerned, privatisation, we should call it, people have referred to it. I will echo what's been said. It's absolutely clear from the Open Services White Paper and subsequent documents that this is an ideologically driven, not an evidence-based driven approach. There's precious little evidence that outsourcing results in better or cheaper services. I know this is nuanced to respond to Paul's point that there are some services that you can say have been improved by outsourcing, particularly to voluntary sector agencies, but generally speaking, the direction of travel and the evidence shows that outsourcing does not result in better and cheaper services. Actually, there's quite a lot of evidence to the contrary. Not that public services don't need to be improved, they do, but floating them off or selling them off is not the way to do it. And this is also where we may start to get to some of the points of difference between us on the panel. Those professional voluntary organisations who think that they can run mainstream public services better than the statutory sector, in my view, are suffering from desperation, naivety, hubris, or a combination of all three. To make the point clear, as far as we're concerned, NCIA, we want effective and democratically controlled public services, and we think that the improvements that are needed can be made whilst retaining direct management. The latest Trojan horse in relation to all this is the Localism Act and the right to challenge, of course, in particular. Now, if this is not about privatisation, then why are we not allowed to challenge a service that's already been contracted out? We want to set up a Localism Watch project within NCIA and to try and collect and publicise critical evidence about the effects of the Localism Act on privatisation. And if there's anyone here who's interested in helping with this, come talk to us afterwards. My second challenge was going to be the private sector. Well, I'm cutting that. I think we can all agree about that. This is really bad news. The private sector is circling around the next phase of bonanza of contracts like vultures around the corpse. I think that we can agree within this room that on the whole this development is extremely regrettable, will be very, very damaging to both the services, to trade union interests and rights and to local communities. But that brings me on, I want to pass on from that and move on to the voluntary sector, because my third challenge is us, those of us in the voluntary sector. And specifically, those of us who have been involved in the services side of the voluntary sector. I've also got a couple of words for those who set themselves up as representatives of the voluntary sector, and I'll come to that in a minute. But the fact is that co-option of voluntary organisations, primarily through the operation of funding regimes, as arm's-length delivery bans for the statutory sector, is highly advanced. And though one can understand why and how people have got caught up in this, for some time it's been absolutely clear that increasing participation in service provision, alongside acceptance of the fit-for-purpose capacity-building industry, was really about getting us ready for the privatisation of public services, where funded services remained in existence, and on the other side, for nebulous ideas of self-help, sufficiency and resilience, where support for services is withdrawn altogether. Now we are seeing, and people are coming to us on a weekly basis with their stories, we're seeing on a scale long-established, embedded local voluntary organisations being shafted by incompetent commissioners, aggressive, predatory national charities, fast becoming private sector lookalikes, and by Byzantine partnership arrangements with the private sector via subcontracting. Now, it beats me why anyone thinks that the proper role of a charity, especially when using volunteers, is to help maximise private profits. Meanwhile, social enterprise, an alarmingly ill-defined concept, is held out as the neat and acceptable way to marry private profit and social good. For the avoidance of doubt, our position is that the proper role of voluntary action is to offer innovative ways to tackling problems, taking risks to demonstrate or explore alternative or radical responses, and being complementary to, not a substitute for, properly accountable public services based on rights and entitlements. And that, above all, the role of voluntary action is to act as a check and a balance against abuse, unfairness, poor policy and malpractice. This is the dance that the voluntary sector should be doing with the state, and it cannot be done from a position of supine co-option. Before moving on, this is where I get to the representative groups, I've got particularly harsh words for the two organisations that have set themselves up as representatives of the sector, that's NCBO and Akivo. NCIA has accepted the new public services agenda, its managerialism and its supposed entrepreneurial culture with enthusiasm. Running workshops, for example, on turning a free service into a paid service, or working with Circa, who've been mentioned already, drawing a code of good practice for subcontracting. Well, tell detainees in immigration centres, both here and in Australia, about Circa's commitment to good practice, and you will receive a hollow laugh. Meanwhile, Akibo does much of the same, while their colourful chief executive is revealed as an active proponent of opening up the NHS to private healthcare providers. If you want to know about that story, have a look at our website. It's an absolute disgrace. But it's not all bad news. For the voluntary sector, it's not confined to the service industry. Indeed, most of the voluntary sector has got nothing to do with it. And here we see thousands of people now lining up to say no to this madness. We're not prepared to accept the shutdown, the dismantling of the welfare state, the handing over vital services to Capita and Virgin and Avery and Serco, or I must say, Bernardo's turning point, Catch-22 and the Crime Reduction Initiative. That's speaking for us anyway. That movement is represented here today. Stroud against the cuts, in defence of youth work, Don't Cut Us Out from Sussex, the Spartacus Alliance, Campaign for a Fair Society, Whitstable against the cuts, Wandsworth against the cuts, Keep Our NHS Public, the People's Republic of Southwark, National Community Activist Network, the list goes on. And the unions, of course, would, amongst other things, unite, unison and others, forging real connections between workplace and community-based struggles. I salute you all, and I celebrate your passion, your vigour and your commitment. Which brings me, I suppose, to my three solutions. I better stop. The problem about me talking is most people have to carry me out speaking. That's the only way of stopping me. I'm sorry about this. Anyway, I'll really quick. The first is directed, my first response is directed to that part of the service sector for whom the penny has not yet dropped. For too many are sleepwalking either into oblivion or into some version of Frankenstein's monster. The message is this: if you take over public services, you're saying you agree with it. If you don't resist privatisation, you're conspiring with it. Recognise that these choices involve taking sides, implicitly or explicitly. Be in touch with the political and ideological nature of your work. Don't hide behind managerialism or professionalism, and don't leave yourself at the door when you arrive for work. I understand how difficult this is. I worked in the professional voluntary service sector for 40 years. Rising demand, a belief in your own organisation, jobs to support, money to find, these are real pressures. But we're now at crunch point, and doing the right thing may mean radically reshaping your organisation and your purpose. And again, for the avoidance of doubt, I'm asking these organisations to take a stand on the issues affecting local people in your constituencies, not take a stand on the sustainability or survival of your own organisation. Secondly, be practical and be specific. Often we have become as lost in our own rhetoric as our opponents are. Mission statements that waffle on about equality and social justice, or campaigns without tangible demands. If this war is to be won, it'll be won battle by battle, rooted in the real-time content of what's happening to services, service users, whole communities, and our democratic and political structures. Benefits, advice work, homelessness, immigration, asylum, police commissioners, disability, social care. This is the bread and butter of our fight back. And lastly, in echoes what other people have said, it's a plea for us to join up and work together. The pressures across the whole of the landscape are towards fragmentation, whether it's local groups focusing on one single issue, or voluntary agencies competing against each other for a slice of the funding. This conference is in part an explicit attempt to bring together both sides of voluntary action, the service sector and the activists, those inside the tent and those outside the tent. If we're canny and we behave tactically, we can forge alliances across the two and develop more bite, more influence and more power to halt the catastrophe that's happening to our communities and to build a better, more radical and alternative future for our communities. Thank you.